This is the Bears Barroom Radio Network. Parental discretion is advised.
Thanos did exactly what he said he was going to do. He wiped out 50% of all living creatures.
We lost, all of us. We lost friends. We lost family. We lost a part of ourselves. This is the fight of our lives.
This is gonna work, Steve.
I know it is. Because I don't know what I'm gonna do if it doesn't.
This thing on? Hey, Miss Potts. If you find this recording, don't feel bad about this. Part of the journey is the end. Just for the record, being adrift in space with zero promise of rescue is more fun than it sounds. Food and water ran out 4 days ago. Oxygen will run out tomorrow morning. That'll be it. When I drift off, I will dream about you. It's always you.
Hi, is anyone home? This is Scott Lang. We met a few years ago at the airport in Germany. Got out really big.
Is this an old message?
Ant-Man, I know you know that.
It's the front door.
That's me. Can you buzz me in?
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Box Office Barflies podcast. Box Office Barflies is a part of the Bears Barroom Radio Network. I'm your host for the night, Joe Mandel, Joey Two Scoops. Joining me, as always, is John Santucci, the Tooch, and our special guest tonight is Ethan Colchamiro. Ethan, how you doing, buddy? And why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
I'm doing good, Joe. Thanks for having me back on the show. My name is Ethan. I'm a cartoonist and designer and, self-proclaimed geek dad. Nice. I'm a huge fan of the Marvel flicks. Seen them with my kiddo and just jazzed to be back on the show. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're glad to have you on. And, of course, we got the Tooch in the house. Johnny, how you doing, my friend?
Hey, fellas, doing great. Looking forward to reviewing Avengers Endgame, the $1.2 billion movie.
Oh, the biggest opening of any film of all time. An unbelievable picture that was 22 films in the making. And gentlemen, before we get into the spoiler portion of the show, we've got to, first off, give our general review, our letter grade. But before we even do that, is this the most anticipated movie of all time? Because for me, it's definitely in that list. Tooch?
Yeah, man. So much buildup. And, I really enjoyed the movie, but I hesitate to say whether or not people who never watched the MCU movies, because it is such a big movie, going to the movie and not knowing anything about it, are not going to get much out of it. They're kind of be like, what the hell's going on? But if you are an MCU fan, you've seen all the movies, it's a big payoff, Joe.
Yeah, and what do you think, Ethan?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, for me, it was definitely one of the most anticipated movies. I mean, there's been, the culmination of a lot of franchises before, but it's never been 22 movies over 10 years. I mean, there's just never been anything like this in the history of cinema. And, you know, even if there is again, it will be the second time it's happened. I mean, this is a once in a lifetime movie event, you know, and Marvel rewrote the playbook. And, you know, even if other people work off the playbook, no one else is going to do this again for the first time.
No doubt about that, Ethan. And speaking of the first time, when I introduced Tooch, I had a funny little drop for him that I forgot to play. But everyone, here's my drop for the Tooch.
We know each other. He's a friend from work. Where have you been? Everybody thought you were dead.
There he is, John Santucci. I know him from work.
That's great.
But men, let's jump into our general review here. So I'm gonna go ahead and toss it first to our guest, Ethan. Your general review without spoilers. We generally grade it on a letter scale. What grade do you give it, and why?
I think for this one, I would say, you know, maybe like an A minus. For me, I thought Infinity War, the movie that teed up Endgame, I thought it, you know, was so tight and it really moved, and there was no fat you could trim off of that film. This movie, you know, I mean, it earns its 3-hour runtime, but there were some things that just didn't seem quite as flawless, quite as tight, quite as smooth as Infinity War. Super satisfying ending to this saga, but maybe just not quite the doesn't stick the landing quite the way Infinity War did for me.
That's a fair explanation. Tooch, what do you think about it, my friend?
Well, I'm right there with Ethan as far as like how tight Infinity War was as far as pacing and direction and story. And, you know, Endgame is over 3 hours long, so that's probably expected. Now, Infinity War didn't make me cry. Endgame did. So there's that.
Yes, exactly.
And, you know, of course, like I said before the show, that with any kind of time travel movie, there are inevitable holes. So, but we get into that in the spoilers section. But
holes and questions, Tooch, and we're encouraging anybody that's in the chat room right now to send any of the questions that you had while watching this film. So we will gladly answer those towards the tail end of the show once we get to the spoilers. But feel free to put any questions in the chat room, right, guys?
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to get some questions from our chat room participants and Bears Barroom Radio. You know, I like I said, I hesitate to I wonder what people will get out of it who don't know anything about the MCU. They're going to be lost, and you know, it's a big payoff if you follow the comics, because there were so many nods to movies and comics. So many Easter eggs, Joe. I mean, I lost track of how many Easter eggs there were. But
unreal, so many,
yeah.
So many.
I'm with Ethan. For Marvel comic book fans, I'm going to give it an A. For non-fans, I'm going to give it an A minus.
Ooh, very nice, Tooch. Very nice. So that's 2 A's, and then it comes to me, gentlemen. This is for me probably the best experience I've ever had as a movie theater as an adult, because I sat through all 22 films. You know, it's been a journey, right? And not only that, but you get this emotional, action-packed, hilarious movie. And I shot out a tweet when I left the theater that, you know, I think I have to read it because this is exactly how I feel still. I said, simply put, we are not worthy of a film of Avengers Endgame's caliber. Blazingly funny, action-packed, and emotionally crushing. I simply can't wait to see it again. And I tell you what, I saw it again on Sunday, so I saw it twice already, and I think it got better on the second viewing for me. I caught a couple more things, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it, guys. I was so pulled in by this movie that I'm going to give it an A+. I think it's going to get nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. I don't think it's going to win, but I think it's going to get nominated. And I think it's going to clean sweep with the visual effects, because this is an absolute bombshell of a movie, gentlemen.
For sure.
Yeah, agreed. Well said. I mean, like I said, there's never anything like this, and I can't even, if you go back, I mean, I think we're all kind of around the same age. I mean, if you remember what superhero movies were like when we were younger men, even in 2008 when I saw the first Iron Man film, I never in a million years thought that I would see the things that these 22 movies have given us, culminating in what we got to see in Endgame. Is just spectacular.
Great point. Yeah. And, one thing, when the MCU set off, like you said, with Iron Man, that's usually where they suggest starting, the saga Iron Man 1. And, man, it was that, it was kind of that, like, Middle East warfare kind of political backdrop that I was like, man, this is so different. They really, really contemporized it. And, from there on, like you said, Ethan, it just took off like wildfire, and you can really live in it with these characters, and that's what I felt with Endgame.
Yeah, and speaking of Iron Man 1, guys, I got a little clip of an amazing clip from Iron Man 1 that I just have to play.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly, with this laundry list of character defects, all the mistakes I made, largely public. Truth is, I am Iron Man.
He is Iron Man, gentlemen, and there will never be another Iron Man like Robert Downey Jr. Talk about someone that owned a role. I mean, what do you guys think about his performance in this whole Infinity Saga? Tooch?
Man, love Robert Downey Jr. I don't want to say anything.
Yeah, not yet.
Robert Downey Jr. is fantastic. I love him. Probably more than his Sherlock Holmes performances, which I thought were brilliant. Also, he's one of the best actors of our generation. Never gets the credit he truly deserves. Gets a lot of credit still, but never gets the credit that he truly deserves. Man. He and Chris Evans undoubtedly the stars of the show.
No doubt. And Ethan, how about you? Aside from Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr., obviously a highlight in this. Who else do you put a big performance? Who else was a highlight for you in this saga and in these last couple films?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the many things that Marvel Studios does so brilliantly is casting. I mean, almost there is nobody that they have miscast in these movies, and I think that, like Tooch said, Chris Evans, maybe even Chris Evans could really be the MVP of the MCU. I mean, Marvel really believes in these characters. Unlike I think DC, where they would try to make Superman edgy and dark and all these kinds of things that Marvel always believed in Captain America and believed in the idea of a person who does the right thing because it's the right thing. He doesn't have any tragedy in his past or any inciting thing that turns him into a hero. He just, before he took the serum, he had that hero in him, and none of that would work if Evans didn't sell it. And so the fact that he sells it, he makes you believe it. It doesn't come off as corny. It's inspiring. And, he's added so many layers to the character over the years. Endgame kind of shows us that in a way we can talk about later. But, yeah, I mean, I think, Robert Downey, and even the new blood now, Tom Holland as Spider-Man and
fantastic, my favorite Spider-Man.
Yeah, Chadwick Boseman as Black Panther. I mean, Brie Larson as Captain Marvel. The franchise is in capable hands because Marvel just keeps nailing it time and time again.
They
I can't wait to see what they have for the future, man.
Yeah, Phase 4 is going to be good, and for those of you wondering, Spider-Man: Far From Home coming out in July is actually the last film of Phase 3, not the start of Phase 4. So maybe we will actually get some more information in that one. But my MVP of the series, I have to go with Robert Downey. I got to go with Chris Evans, and let's talk about. And Greg Braggs mentioned this in the chat room. I gotta say, Josh Brolin as Thanos in these last two films was just absolutely unbelievable, guys. I mean, he sold that role. He is Thanos to me, and these couple movies wouldn't have not been as good if he wasn't so amazing as the Mad Titan himself, Thanos.
Oh, yeah, he was excellent
for our time. Yeah.
When we reviewed Infinity War with Ethan, we said that Thanos was the best MCU villain so far, and he really lived up to. We'll talk about that in the spoilers section because it's a little bit of a twist. But I also got to mention Chris Hemsworth, who was on Infinity War, and he's excellent in this too. It's a little bit of a spin. Also, we'll talk about that too. But yeah, Chris Hemsworth really turning out to be a really good actor, man.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Chris Hemsworth is fantastic. The whole movie just had an unbelievable cast, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that. So, gentlemen, what do you say we take a stroll here into the spoiler section? And if you guys out there have not seen the movie yet, this is the part where you leave and come back and listen to the podcast version. So here it is. It's time for the spoiler alert. Spoiler alert! That's right. That's the spoiler alert, and that means we are moving into the spoiler section, guys. And here on Box Office Barflies, we always start with the opening scene, right, Tooch? That's right.
Yeah. We'll start with the opening, how it sets the tone.
That's right. So the tone is set, and it's a naturally very, very dark tone. It opens with Hawkeye with his family at a barbecue kind of in the middle of the woods. He's practicing archery with his daughter. His son and his wife are making hot dogs, and he helps his daughter aim, shoot the bow and arrow. She gets a bullseye. He turns his back for a second, and then boom, his whole family was dusted from Thanos' snap. And then you see a distraught Hawkeye running around looking for his family, and then we go to the Marvel logo and start of the movie, and it's just like I had chills from the very start, guys. Ethan, I'm going to throw it to you. How did that make you feel, and how did you think of it as a start of a movie?
I mean, I thought it was a brilliant way to start the film. I mean, hugely emotional, and I think that, we didn't get to see Hawkeye in Avengers Infinity War. And I personally, I don't know, maybe I'm in the minority. I love the character of Hawkeye, and it's another example of how Marvel believes in these characters. In no other franchise would you have a thing where you have like a guy who is a god, a guy, in a high tech, who's basically wearing a stealth bomber, and another guy who could punch the earth out of its orbit, but they'll still say like, well, we have a guy who does archery and we got to bring him too. Only Marvel would commit to that. And so I love Hawkeye. I love Jeremy Renner as Hawkeye.
Oh, yes.
To open that and see how he is emotionally, how this affected him, a guy who thought he was out of this world, out of this superhero life. It was hugely emotional. It really sets the tone, for how this movie is going to kick off with the fallout of the snapping and gets you in the right kind of somber tone for what's to come.
Yeah, and Tooch, how did it make you feel, man? I know it probably hit home, especially with you. I know Ethan also has a family, but Tooch, I know you're an emotional guy, and especially in this film, I know you were because we talked about it. How did that opening scene make you feel?
Oh man, it really gets you into the tone of how these people had to live with losing so many people, half of the earth gone. So yeah, it was, that really set the tone because the first act, while I thought it was a little slow, was really how these people were dealing with the aftermath. I mean, Captain America was leading a focus group, so, there was, lots of different ways they were were trying to deal with this. And one of the guys in the focus group was Joe Russo, I think. One of the directors. But
you're very correct. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I thought the first act was a little slow, but we'll get into that when we talk about what they do in that first act.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they can get into the movie the way they do without that first 20 minutes, right? You got to set up everything, and I'll quickly see my reaction to the Hawkeye part in the beginning. For me, man, it just gutted me when I saw it, and I'm like, I have a feeling I think it's going to happen, and then it did, and just it just pulled me further into this movie and got me more emotionally invested. And I think that's the amazing thing about these movies, that you care about these characters, and it made me care even more about this universe. And we get through that scene and get to the start of the movie, and the Avengers team is really trying to figure out, trying to track down Thanos, and trying to figure out what they can do, and that sets this movie and gets it going. And Tooch, they really got rolling there, and they introduced a new character, being Captain Marvel. And I got to ask you, what did you think about her role in the beginning of this?
Well, I mean, I liked the Captain Marvel movie, so I was looking forward to seeing Brie Larson reprise her role. And I kind of wish we would have gotten a little more Captain Marvel, but I was wondering, how the heck is Tony Stark going to get home? He was playing Go Fish with Nebula forever. Well, they were playing Go Fish, right? Is that what they're playing, or what were they playing? I can't remember.
No, they were playing Flick Football.
Flick Football. I'm sorry.
Yeah, even better.
They were playing the Flick Football. But and then of course Captain Marvel, is the one who brings Tony home, and Nebula is the one that tells him where to find the good old bad guy.
Yeah, and Ethan, Captain Marvel had her own film, obviously, and they introduced her in here. And a lot of people don't know, Brie Larson actually filmed Avengers Endgame before she filmed Captain Marvel. And I think that's kind of evident a little bit by the way the character's handled in the film. And Ethan, I know you being the comic book guy that you are, I'm curious your thoughts on her involvement in the film and kind of how the story didn't necessarily revolve around her in this one.
Right. I think, like Tooch, I think I was expecting her to have a bigger role in the film, but, ultimately this movie is sort of a victory lap for the original 6. There weren't really, Nebula and Ant-Man, were able to get some good screen time, and I could talk for hours about Ant-Man. I love the character and Paul Rudd, but I do feel like they have to be careful with how they're using Captain Marvel, because it seemed like anytime in this film, whenever all hope was lost, Captain Marvel flew in and saved the day with, this level of power that, seems like, nothing can really throw her for a loop or slow her down. And, that was a problem, I think, with Superman, in his comic books in the 70s and 80s, is that he was so overpowered, he ceased to be interesting.
Right.
So
exactly.
I hope that, Marvel, in this movie, there were some great cheer moments when she sort of showed up and I was cheering along with everybody. But I hope going forward in the future, they make sure to kind of, have her with, adversaries that, make things a little more interesting for her, when we've already seen in both her movie and now in Endgame that, she can destroy spaceships that are the size of a continent, on her own. It kind of it begs the question of like how, but at the same time, I was cheering alongside everybody else when she did destroy those gigantic spaceships and things like that. So would have liked to have seen a little bit more from her, but also understood that we're going to get plenty of her in phase 4 and maybe 5 and 6 as well. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think Brie Larson's in it for the long haul. obviously we talked about it, and we enjoyed Captain Marvel quite a bit. But like you mentioned, Ethan, definitely a victory lap for the original folks. And, and there were some stories in this that I didn't expect. And
Agreed.
It was we got further into the universe than I thought we ever would, and we talked a little bit about how they're setting up the rest of the movie. It starts, the team, finds out where Thanos is. So sure enough, they assemble a little team and they fly off to the planet where Thanos is all alone by himself, and they launch an attack on Thanos all by himself. And Ethan, I'll let you explain a little bit, but to the folks out there. Is that what you expected on the planet, and how it played out? Do you think it could have been handled any differently?
Boy, I got to say that was I saw it probably like you fellas did in a packed theater, and I mean the gasps from people. The whole theater was in shock. I will say when the scene sets up with Thanos, in his that's directly from the comics, and. When Thanos, kind of had his farmer Thanos phase, where the scarecrow of his armor and things like that, it was a little different in the comics. He went into that life after failing, but in this film this was sort of his retirement plan after succeeding. So the farmer Thanos thing was something that I was expecting, and they hinted at a little bit in the trailer. The fact that one, he no longer has the stones, so they can't unsnap. And two, the fact that Thor uses that moment to aim for the head, which he did not last time, was not expecting. Total shocker moment, and a moment that really, at that point, you're like, okay, I have no idea what to expect from this movie. This movie is not playing by numbers. This movie is not what the trailers hinted at. We're on a ride that none of us know where it's going, and I loved it. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, that really set up one of the biggest shockers for me in the whole film. As soon as that scene ends, the screen goes to black, and it says 5 years later. You see a time jump, a massive time jump, which I will tell you right away, I was not expecting that in this film. How did you guys feel when you saw that, Tooch? When I saw that time jump, I was immediately like, oh my God, nothing happened for 5 years? I mean, I was just lost for words. How did you feel?
Yeah, I think that's part of why I thought like the first act, and part of the second act were a little slow and a little, hard, disjointed, hard to tie together, especially with that 5 year jump. But I mean, we go from Thanos' head rolling around on the farmhouse floor to the Avengers getting ready to try and solve it some other way when they find out that Thanos has destroyed the 6 stones. They don't know what they're going to do. They were hoping to re-snap, and get everybody back. So, of course, when Scott arrives, you played the clip at the beginning. When Scott Lang, Ant-Man, arrives, they get the idea to, hey, let's go through the quantum realm and get the stones. And it turns into kind of the time travel section in the middle act.
Or as Ant-Man would like to call, the time heist.
The time heist, exactly, where you get a lot of time travel movies listed and referenced.
Yes, that was hilarious.
Which was funny, but of course, the thing that struck me the most was how little satisfaction Thor got from, lopping off Thanos' head. And aside from the shock that the viewer gets, is like, okay, the bad guy's dead. What are we going to do now? That part I thought was brilliant because, along with the time travel, they get to fight, Guardians of the Galaxy era Thanos, who has a hint later on. We'll talk about that. Who has a hint of what's going on, through some clever writing. And
definitely.
While it was slow, I mean, there were some really funny moments, especially with the fat Thor, who he goes to pot after not, after not getting the satisfaction of killing Thanos and putting things right, which was his main goal, and he failed pretty much twice at that, and ends up, like the dude from Big Lebowski, drinking beer and playing Fortnite with 10-year-olds. Yeah,
that was hilarious. And guys, I gotta say, you mentioned Tooch. You mentioned how Ant-Man was brought out of the quantum realm. For those folks that didn't see Ant-Man and the Wasp,
right.
At the end of that, at the end of that film, he gets caught in the quantum realm. And can we argue that in this film, that rat that goes through the van and hits the buttons, is he the real MVP of this movie? Ethan,
if we're gonna we have to give that rat a shout out. I mean, he really. Is the one who really brought Thanos down.
Yes, he really did, and it set everything in motion. And sure enough, they go and bring the idea to Tony Stark, and of course, spoiler alert: 5 years later, he's got a daughter named Morgan, and he's married to Pepper, and he's got a very happy life with his cabin in the woods. And at first, he immediately says, "No, I don't want to help. I've got everything I need." And everyone who knows Tony Stark knows that he starts thinking and uses his brain. And sure enough, it gets the best of him, and he talks to Pepper, who basically tells him, go ahead and move forward with it, because otherwise you won't be able to sleep at night. And that's the truth. And I know I could really, connect with that, because I've had so many things that I think about and overanalyze, and that made Tony Stark even more relatable for me. And Tooch, Tony Stark as a character, had so many moments in this movie that you could connect with. Did you have any moments like that?
Oh yeah, the scene with his father, where he in this act 2, where he encounters his father looking for one of the time stones, and his father is about to. He finds out his wife is pregnant. He's about to be a father, and Tony Stark, unbeknownst to Howard Stark, gets to know his father a little bit before, what his father was like before he was about to become a father, and he's able to inject some wisdom into his dad, and we kind of had the impression that Howard Stark was a bit of a martinet, and we get a little softer side that Tony came to appreciate there, and I that was the scene that I connected with, Joe.
Yeah, man, there was so many of those, and through that time heist, and Ethan, I'll throw this to you for the next one, but the time heist had part of the team go to many different parts of this Marvel universe, different times, different places, different movies. How cool was it, going back in time, seeing the original Avengers movie with the current Avengers, kind of seeing themselves and kind of interacting with themselves. I mean, Ethan, how was that for you? Because I know you're a huge comic book fan, and how much nostalgia did that bring down the pipe for you?
Oh, that was brilliant. I mean, some of my favorite moments of the entire film are, the Avengers, the current day Avengers, kind of weaving in and out of the Battle of New York from the first film. And, it was funny for, the sort of Professor Hulk to see, the big green rampaging Hulk. But, I mean, I think my favorite part of that is, Cap interacting with Cap. And, when we talk about the character progression, the character arc that Chris Evans has gone on, and for him, where he is now, to go back to, I feel like, the Winter Soldier added so much to that character's worldview. It really, he kind of lost his innocence more so in the Winter Soldier film than anything else. So to have sort of post-Winter Soldier Cap go back and encounter pre-Winter Soldier Cap, you really see how much Evans has grown in that role. And he also does a phenomenal job of playing both versions, the innocent and, more worldly versions of Cap as they fight each other. That was hysterical with the, I can do this all day. Yeah, I know, kind of, call out. That was one of my biggest laughs of the film. And, the way he gets the scepter back was genius. Without having to throw a punch, and the movie kind of sets it up like you think they're going to redo the big elevator fight from Winter Soldier, but instead Cap uses brains instead of brawn, and another, maybe the second biggest laugh of the film for me was the way he used his knowledge of who's a Hydra agent and who isn't to smuggle the scepter. And another big thing, Doctor Strange is one of my favorite, maybe one of the more underrated movies in the MCU canon. So to have not just a cameo, but a real scene with the Ancient One, Tilda Swinton as the Ancient One, was great. I mean, I loved that whole sequence, and it was interesting to see that she had joined the battle. Really, I mean, they showed her fighting some Chitauri soldiers, until Professor Hulk shows up to take the Time Stone, and all of that was really, really sweet. And out of all the different time heists, going back to the Battle of New York was definitely a highlight for me of the whole film.
Absolutely, and you mentioned Professor Hulk, guys, so I got to stop and talk about that for a second. Some people in the chat room were talking about this earlier. The decision to make Hulk, one with himself, and Mark Ruffalo kind of accepting the Hulk as part of, Bruce Banner technically accepting the Hulk as part of himself and kind of controlling that aspect of him. I thought that was a genius decision, and I thought, it really paid off. The first scene with the kids taking pictures, Hulk even dabbed in this movie, guys. So, I mean, how cool is that? So what did you guys think of that decision? Tooch, how about you?
I love Professor Hulk. I thought the actor Mark Ruffalo did a really great job with it too, because the facial features of Professor Hulk look like big Mark Ruffalo, like a happy kind of, like you said, kind of a stoner Mark Ruffalo. He's posing for pictures with kids in the diner for selfies, and the only thing I love seeing Hulk, tear stuff up. For 2 movies, we didn't get a lot of it. That was my only disappointment. But as far as Professor Hulk, I thought it was funny, man. I was enjoying the character too. I just wanted to see some ass kicking, because he had a real problem with not kicking any ass in Infinity War. He was largely absent, in Infinity War, and
yes, he was.
Another character that I liked from Infinity War that was missing was Vision. I don't know, did we see Vision at all? Vision was one of my favorite characters of the Avengers, the comics, when I was a little kid. So when they brought him to life in the Age of Ultron, and he had a fairly large part in Infinity War, but he was not even around in Endgame. That was a little disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, I believe in this timeline he's still dead because Thanos, took the stone out of his head, and then also, I don't believe Shuri was able to finish that copy, or at least fully, implement it. So there is a Disney Plus series coming out at some point. It's probably not this year, it'll probably be next year, but it's called WandaVision. So obviously it'll be about the Scarlet Witch, and you have to infer that Vision will be a part of the story in some way. So maybe Shuri was able to copy that information, and maybe they'll make a new version. But that's something to keep your eyes peeled on for the future. And Ethan, real quick before we move on from this, what did you think about the decision to use like a Professor Hulk type role?
Oh, I really liked it. I mean, there was a great run of Hulk comics in the, I think, late 80s, early 90s where he was Professor Hulk. And this, from what all reports, this is Mark Ruffalo's last hurrah as the Hulk. So that's a kind of a thing where, in the movies, I mean, up until Ragnarok, he really hardly ever talked. So seeing something like Professor Hulk on the screen is not a thing that I expected to see anytime soon. So it was a real treat to get that. One of the things in the comics that kind of made Professor Hulk a liability is, the madder Hulk gets, the stronger he gets. Well, Professor Hulk is a little too, intellectual to ever really lose his lose his temper and get as strong as you need him to be. And that kind of played out in this film too, where he wasn't much of a powerhouse as you would expect the Hulk to be. And I would have liked to have seen Hulk and Thanos have a rematch. But I think that there were a lot of characters who needed a rematch with Thanos, and I think the first time I saw it, I was a little disappointed that the Hulk didn't get a second shot at him. But then on second viewing, I felt like Scarlet Witch having her throwdown with Thanos was so much more emotionally satisfying. Seeing her get her payback for the loss of Vision was a lot more emotionally satisfying than just seeing Hulk whoop him because he got whooped. That would have been a fun thing, but not as satisfying as Scarlet Witch really taking a piece out of him.
When Hulk traveled back, Joe, in time, he was like, I guess I should be menacing, maybe throw some stuff around. He was just kind of half-assed throwing a motorcycle here. Rawr! That was really funny.
Half-ass smash. But while we're talking about the time heist, I don't think we could talk about this without talking about arguably the most important stone here, and the biggest surprise of the movie for me is the acquisition of the Soul Stone. So you see Hawkeye and Scarlet Witch going to
Black Widow.
I'm sorry, slip of the tongue. Black Widow and Hawkeye going to get the Soul Stone. None of them really knowing what it means or how to get the Soul Stone. Sure enough, they find the Red Skull, a.k.a. Death, in this point in this story. Yeah. And he kind of gives them the rundown on how they have to acquire it. And they basically fight each other to find out who gets to kill themselves. Right. And
great scene.
And it was a very emotional, powerful scene. And, it did not go the way I thought. Tooch, talk a little bit about this scene and kind of like the feelings you had while watching it.
Well, I love the scene because there were so many times where, both of them almost fell off the edge, where Gamora was thrown off by Thanos in Infinity War. And, we end up losing Black Widow, and I felt, that was probably the right choice since Black Widow never really had a family other than the Avengers. And Hawkeye had everything to live for. So for me, that was, it's where we started in the movie, where Hawkeye loses his family and he's on his mission to get his family back. So for me, I mean, while it's sad it worked out the way it did and we lose Black Widow, I guess she's going to return in her own movie later on in the next phase. But it did leave open one question for me, Joe and Ethan, was when Captain America had to return the stones to their places, he would have encountered his arch enemy Red Skull. I would have liked to have seen that moment because that would have been that's where you've been hiding, right? But it was a great scene, Joe.
Yeah, very powerful, and talking about that Scarlet Witch movie before I get to Ethan. I said Scarlet Witch again. Getting to the Black Widow movie, the solo movie. It's all been but confirmed at this point, and it sounds like it's going to be a prequel. So, my question to Ethan, 1, how did you feel about this scene? And 2, is Black Widow really gone?
So as far as how I felt about the scene, I mean, it was incredibly emotional because, here you have two people, you don't want to see either one of them go, and, they love each other so much that they're basically fighting each other to be the one who sacrifices themselves. And one of the many, many things I appreciated about the MCU is, the relationship between, Black Widow and Hawkeye, they never tried to shoehorn any kind of lame romance into that. It was always, a platonic, love, and they were family. And, I think that, to me, I know it's been a little controversial. Some people have been, a little upset at the thought that, Black Widow thought, or that the movie was saying that maybe Black Widow's life was worth less because she didn't have children. And, I didn't have that interpretation. I really felt like, going back to the original Avengers film, the first one, Black Widow had that red in her ledger, and Hawkeye was sent to kill her, but made the call that, she was, brainwashed and that there was a good person in there. And, she always had that debt to repay him for saving her life. So I felt like that was really why she made that decision, was that, she still felt like she owed him one for essentially allowing her to have a life and have a family in the Avengers. And so it was super emotional. And, I think that both of the Soul Stone deaths, both Gamora and Black Widow, I think are not going, I think reversing them in any way would feel like a cop-out, because those were both hugely emotional scenes, and to redo them in any way or undo them, I think would, sort of undercut the emotion of it. And I think Marvel, saw when they resurrected Coulson that it kind of undercut one of the most dramatic moments of the Avengers movie. So I feel like they won't go down that route again, and probably the Black Widow movie will be a prequel, which, there's still plenty of story to tell about her time before Hawkeye kind of got her out of that life.
Right.
Yeah, I think really well said, Ethan. And before we move on to the tail end of this film, I want to talk a little bit about, you just mentioning Gamora.
Yeah.
And the mixed timelines, introduce old Gamora into the new timeline. So technically, newer Gamora is dead and old Gamora is alive in this timeline.
Yep.
So, what do you think about that, Tooch? And what do you think about her involvement in future Guardians movies? Because I think Guardians of the Galaxy 3 might focus on the search for Gamora. What do you think, Tooch?
Man, I'm not sure what, it really made me think. It's in my notes as well. Gamora, of course, when she and Star-Lord are reunited in Endgame, she doesn't even know who he is, really, because they haven't had a relationship. Old Gamora and, the Peter Quill from this timeline don't know each other, and she even turns to Nebula. She goes, "This is the one," that she's supposedly in love with. I guess Nebula must have mentioned something to her, but it made me really think about Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Will Gamora be rediscovering her love for Peter, in that one, or will it, like you said, will it be a search for Gamora? In an alternate storyline. But I mean, and as far as Guardians of the Galaxy, man, Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy, where that leaves off at the end, Thor traveling with Guardians of the Galaxy, man, they had great interaction. Infinity War is probably some of the best parts of Infinity War, were Thor and the Guardians. It was really funny. So that should be really interesting. Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy 3 are together. Man, I'll really enjoy that.
Or as Thor said, the Asgardians of the Galaxy.
Right.
Ethan, what'd you think about that choice with Gamora, and what do you think about that for future films, and what do you think about Thor?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to sort of leave the Guardians. And obviously, since the last time we all talked, James Gunn was not part of that franchise, and now he is again. So, and I know an Infinity War and maybe Endgame, since a lot of them were filmed concurrently, they had asked James Gunn to write all of the Guardian dialogue so that it sounded right. So maybe he's got a plan of what Endgame means for Guardians Volume 3. I mean, I would think sort of, intercutting, Quill's desire to, rekindle a relationship with 2014 Gamora, intercutting that with, some kind of new adventure, makes a lot of sense, and definitely could be where they take it. I had also heard, I think on the Infinity War commentary, that there's maybe, when we see the Guardians in Infinity War, That's like 3 or 4 years after Volume 2. So there's a good little chunk of time, if they wanted to, that they could still tell Guardian stories about, the pre-Infinity War, pre-snapping Guardians. So there's a lot that they could do. The Thor kind of, getting to, Fat Thor, which, I'm saying right now is going to be a very popular cosplay for the next, 5 or 10 years. Finally, the average comic book fan now has Thor's physique. So we're going to see a lot of Fat Thor cosplay. I guarantee you that. But it was interesting because I felt like both Thor kind of, completely letting himself go, and, Thor and Hawkeye's little stint as Ronin really just kind of shows how poorly men deal with grief. I feel like that was one of the themes of Endgame, where they either go into total anger mode, with Hawkeye becoming Ronin, which is sort of this Punisher-esque character that just takes all of his anger out on criminals, or Thor just kind of, self-destructively eating and drinking himself into oblivion, which
great point.
If you have the metabolism of a thunder god, I don't know how much you have to eat and drink before you get that bod, but a lot. I know. I wish I could have a little bit of that, but it was. I was kind of hoping for Thor to reach some kind of redemption moment. I understand it was a huge failure on his part, and billions of lives were lost, he thinks, because of him. And it's kind of weird for me to see a movie where somebody's weight gain is just like, he's just like, there's a ton of fat jokes, and a lot of them are hysterical, and we know Rocket is kind of a jerk, and maybe in some way he's razzing Thor like that to get him to, get his shit together and get something going. But I think if this winds up being the last time we see Chris Hemsworth as Thor, even though it was super funny and entertaining, I hope we get a moment where the character gets to reclaim the glory, and it sounds like before the Endgame press, Hemsworth was pretty clear that this was his last hurrah. Now he's saying in interviews that he's open to either another Thor film or Guardians film. So I hope we get to see Thor back as a hero.
Yeah, I agree. I hope so too. And
I can't imagine anyone else as Thor right now, man. He's done such a great job.
Oh no, yeah, they can't recast that. They got to let that go for a while. Yeah. I think any of these characters, we can't reboot these for at least a decade or so. We need to, honor what they gave us.
Well, and speaking of rebooting and finishing out a circle, let's move forward to the last chapter of the film.
Yeah.
And the time heist works. Everyone gets their stones back. Obviously, we lose the Black Widow. And Tony has built his own Infinity Gauntlet because, of course, he has. And he plugs in, all the stones. And Hulk volunteers to put it on because he's the strongest of everyone. He can take it. Puts it on in great pain, but he snaps and undoes everything that Thanos does. While that's all happening, we forgot to mention in one of the time heists, Gamora was found out by Thanos that she had two versions of herself, and old Gamora basically said... Yeah, geez, Nebula. Thank you very much. Slip of the tongue. Old Nebula sabotaged current Nebula, and long story short, she was able to get Thanos and his whole squad of baddies to transport through time to current place, and as soon as the snap is undone, Thanos' giant spaceship blows the living hell out of where the Avengers are, And then we get put into this crazy, fast-paced last chapter of the movie. And Ethan, I'll let you walk through our listeners through that, because a heck of a whole lot went down, and it was arguably the best 20 minutes in this whole saga.
I mean, yeah, that's a lot to encapsulate, but I think, it was so satisfying. Not only were great action sequences, you really start off at first with the core three, Captain America, Thor, and Iron Man, going toe-to-toe with Thanos. And in that, we get maybe the number one, the whole theater was cheering and hooting and hollering when Captain America picks up Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, and just hands Thanos a grade A whooping. With Thor, saying he knew the Cap was worthy, and hugely satisfying moment. And then, Iron Man and Thor are taken out of the battle. Cap is, on his last legs. Thanos brings his entire army to bear with even more, hideous looking creatures than he had in Infinity War. And the Black Order, his children, who are still alive. And, it's just Cap standing, down this army. And it's a great moment to, we go back to Skinny Steve with that garbage can lid in his hand. Even though he knows he's going to get obliterated, he's not going to stand down. This is what we think is Cap's last stand. And then we hear Sam Wilson, who's one of my favorite MCU characters, is super underrated.
Oh, yeah.
Radio in, on your left, a bunch of, Doctor Strange's, portals open up, and then everybody we lost from the Snapshire steps in to back up Cap and the Avengers for just a gigantic throwdown that makes the Battle of Wakanda look like, Civil War reenactors. I mean, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. And honestly, I mean, when I saw Giant Man, Kolkak, Chitauri, Leviathan, it was like, I mean, I never in a million years thought I would ever see anything right from the comic book pages on the screen like that. I mean, every character that you grew up, either reading about or seeing in a cartoon, is having these great moments in this epic battle. And just couldn't have been more satisfying. I mean, everybody got their moments. Sometimes you would wish, I wish this person had a little bit more of a moment, or, that was, you only got to see them for a split second. But, in 22 movies with dozens and dozens of characters, everybody got a moment. And most importantly, the original franchise leads, who are all mostly retiring, got hugely satisfying moments. So it was, I mean, every dollar you spent, you got your money's worth 100 times back in that 20-30 minute action sequence.
No doubt. And then you get this fantastic passing of the baton scene where, Hawkeye starts out with the Infinity Gauntlet and he's running, and then he passes it off to the Black Panther, who passes it off to Spider-Man, to Valkyrie, and it's just this unbelievable chase scene that just, I don't know, man. It's some of the most fun I've had in this saga.
Oh,
and,
agreed.
Sure enough, it's a great battle. It's going back and forth, but you knew that the gauntlet was going to end up back in the hands of Thanos, right? So it gets into Thanos' hands. He's going to put on the gauntlet, and Iron Man runs up and, with whatever strength he has left, tries to get Thanos and pull the gauntlet off, and he does not succeed, right, guys? And Thanos puts up his hand, goes to snap his fingers, and nothing happens. He looks at the gauntlet, realizes that he does not have any of the stones, cuts to Tony Stark, who has on his own gauntlet, with all the stones in it, electricity flowing through his body. Tony Stark stares down Thanos and says an unbelievable, one of the most badass last lines in the history of cinema. Looks him dead in the eye and goes, "I am Iron Man." Snap.
Yeah.
And you guys, and what happens, Tooch, to Thanos and his army after the snap?
Yeah, they all vanish pretty much, just taken out. Yeah, and,
they get dusted.
Dusted. Man, it was a bittersweet ending, with both Iron Man and Captain America. Very sad with losing Tony, who wasn't able to handle the effects of the 6 stones snapping, and then of course Captain America with his second life. That was great. Do you guys think? Do you think Bucky knew what Cap was going to do at the end there?
Well, I do think he knew what was going to happen, and I want to get to that in 1 second. I want to react a little bit more to Tony Stark here for a second.
Yeah.
Because him and Cap are the faces of the Marvel Universe, right? So
Avengers.
Tony talked to Doctor Strange in the last movie, and he knew that there was one shot for this to happen. And I don't know if you guys caught this, but Doctor Strange is busy keeping the water up in the dam with his power so that no one gets flooded. And I don't know if you caught this, but Tony takes a peek at takes a peek at Doctor Strange, and Doctor Strange lifts up one finger to signify this is the one shot.
Mm-hmm.
This is it. So Tony knew what he had to do, and he sacrificed himself for the greater good, for his family, for his daughter, for the world, for Peter Parker, who he had a lot of guilt for, leading to his death. And Ethan, I want to get your reaction to that as someone who loved the comics. Before we get into the Captain America stuff, how did that make you feel?
I mean, it's so hard to end a saga like this, and I can't imagine, Iron Man's story ending any better, And when you think about when we met him, how selfish he was, how and even Cap said in the first Avengers, you're not the one to make the sacrifice play, and we see how far he's come, and we see that now he understands, like he knew when he knew he couldn't survive that snap, and he knew what Doctor Strange was telling him, that this was a one-way trip, and like Tooch said, it was bittersweet. It was incredibly satisfying, and it was a great, when you have a villain like Thanos, you want to see them meet their end in a really satisfying way, and to see him dust away the way he had done to so many people after watching all of his army dust away before him. Hugely satisfying. A great way for a great villain to go out, and a great way for a great hero to end that 10-year journey as Iron Man. And that last line, couldn't have been better. So yeah, I mean, I was thrilled with it. It was emotional. It was exciting. It was great to see Thanos get his comeuppance, and even I always liked about the first Avengers movie. I mean, it opens with Tony Stark thinking he's the smartest, most powerful person in the world. And by the end of it, he's met the Hulk and Thor and Thanos and Loki, and he realizes he's not the biggest fish in the pond anymore. And he spends really the rest of his time in the MCU trying to get ready for that next invasion, that next bigger threat. And he was able to create a suit of armor that impressed somebody like Thanos. I mean, a regular person to Thanos is like an ant. You can imagine an ant doing something so impressive that you respect the ant. I mean, that's what he did, in Infinity War and especially in Endgame. And it was a great character arc and a great achievement. And I was as a superhero fan, a movie fan, I was just loving it.
Yep.
Incredibly satisfying and incredibly sad.
Yep.
And that leads us into Captain America, right? So after the emotional funeral of Tony Stark, everyone that ever meant something to him in his life is there. We cut to Captain America taking all of the Infinity Stones and bringing them back to where they belong in their, respective timelines, right? So Cap says goodbye to everybody. He gets into his time travel suit and warps off to return the stones. Time for him to return. 3, 2, 1. No Cap. He doesn't come back. And Tooch had alluded to it that Bucky kind of knew what was going to happen, but they cut and turn around to a bench in the woods that's facing a body of water. And Bucky goes, look. And Sam and Bucky walk out to see an old, aged version of Steve Rogers. And Sam goes over to talk to him. And Tooch, why don't you walk us through those last couple moments in this film?
Well, that was great, man. I was unexpected for me, but I really thought that scene was very life-affirming, for the viewer, to have a second chance at, an alternate life, especially, away from... we don't exactly know what happened to him. I think that would make a great movie, by the way. What happened to Captain America all that time? It might get that Red Skull scene, but they hinted to it too. When you see it at the end, you finally realize, okay, when he was looking through the blinds at Peggy Carter, he had to have been thinking about some way to get back there. I mean, he carried her locket around with her, right? Ethan, did he carry the picture of her around?
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah, I still had it. And
he carried a torch for her for a long time. And, when we finally see the bench, like Joe said, when we finally see the bench, we understand exactly what happened, Joe.
Yeah, and Captain America elected. Very bittersweet and a very fitting end for Captain America's arc in these films. He gets to go back, returns the stones, and returns to the love of his life, which he mentioned earlier in the film, which is Peggy Carter. He gets to live his life. He gets to live a full life, and he has a wedding band on his finger, so he gets married. Probably has children, which could be something that could also pop up maybe in the next phase. And, he hands off his shield and hands off the mantle of Captain America to Sam, to the Falcon. So, we have Sam becoming Captain America, and the Winter Soldier's obviously still around. And for all you folks listening out there, Disney Plus is going to have a new show. I believe it's going to come out either this year or next, called Winter Soldier and Falcon, and it's going to chronicle the adventures of Bucky Barnes and Sam Wilson. So I don't know about you guys, but Ethan, how excited does it make you for that, and what did you think about that ending?
Oh, I mean, I'm hugely excited for that. When I talked about things I never thought I'd see on screen, when I was a kid, Captain America's comic was called Captain America and the Falcon. That they were a team, and that's the kind of thing you never think you're going to see. When you talk about the Tim Burton Batman movies, or where they don't go 100% with it. Like, I never thought I'd get to see Captain America and the Falcon, having adventures on screen. So when they introduced him in Winter Soldier, I was so jazzed, and I loved the way they introduced the character. I've loved all of his appearances in the MCU. So I think he's, one of my favorite characters, and I love, I know in the current comic books, Sam Wilson has taken over the mantle of Captain America, where he has the shield and the wings, and he's Captain America now. So I'm really, I know the day that Marvel drops that first image of Anthony Mackie in the Captain America costume, I'm going to be just totally geeked out about it. And the Disney Plus miniseries, it would be interesting to see if it's about that transition from Falcon to Captain America, or if it's about adventures they had before. But whatever it is, both of those characters, I'm super down to see more of. And I do feel like if there's one person who's maybe gotten the short shrift in the past couple of movies, it would be Bucky. Infinity War and Endgame, he really didn't get, much to do. And while I love that last little moment was really more of Cap and Sam kind of having their last goodbye, I never really felt like, from the emotional connection Cap and Bucky had in Winter Soldier, never really got a good closure to their friendship the way we did with Cap and Peggy and Cap and Sam. So hopefully that Disney Plus series will give Sebastian Stan as Bucky Barnes a little bit more time to shine.
Yeah, I really hope so, and I just have to say that I just thought that was the perfect way to end this film.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope I get to see more of Bucky and Anthony Mackie in the series coming up. I think it's going to be great. I thought the movie as a whole was just an incredible piece of cinematic history, and I loved every second of it. And real quick, the last thing we're going to talk about, guys, is let's talk about the credits for a second, because as a spoiler to everyone listening, there is no post-credit scene. This is, I believe, the first Marvel film without one. And
correct,
gentlemen, even though there was no post-credit scene, the adventure in the credits alone of the characters was worth sitting and watching. Tooch, how did you feel watching the credits, and how excited did it have you? Was your audience cheering? What was the vibe in your theater?
Yeah, very. A lot of people cheering, a lot of big rounds of applause, some standing ovations. Great end credits. And also we got a posthumous Stan Lee appearance too, right, Joe?
Yeah, make love, not war, baby.
Right. I forgot to talk. It was in my notes too, and I was like, that's unless they digitally recreate him, right? He won't be appearing in any more films. So R.I.P.
That's the last
Stan
one.
Lee.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ethan, what was your reaction to the final credits?
Oh yeah, I thought it was really well done. I mean, a few friends who had gotten to see it before me, I had told them all I want zero spoilers, and the one thing that they had told me was, no post-credit sequence. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because those were really always about teeing up the next thing, or getting you jazzed for the possibilities of what comes next. But this was a farewell. This was a final moment with these characters. So it made a lot of sense to not tease anything else and just let this story have its moment. I also really enjoyed as the credits, and they were showing all of the actors who, had been, a part of the thing, but then giving the core six that moment with the actor's signature and a nice little title card to go with each one of them. I thought that was really classy and a nice tribute to what those six actors brought to this 22 movie extravaganza. So it felt right. It felt appropriate, and I also think people sit through the end credits to see the stingers at the end, but I mean, we all work in marketing, design, art. It takes a lot of people to make these movies, and
absolutely.
As much as we say like, oh, Brolin was great as Thanos, or Mark Ruffalo was great as Professor Hulk, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of animators who are just as responsible for those great performances, and it's worth, even if there's not a post-credit stinger, it's worth kind of sitting around and just seeing the multitude of super talented people who bring these things to life. So we still sat through it, and now I don't know if you guys noticed, but there was not a stinger, but a sound. Did you guys hear the sound at the end?
There was a sound at the very, very end of the credits, and it was the sound from the very first Iron Man, of Iron Man hammering his suit. It's just clank, 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 and it goes to black.
Yeah.
And I was gonna touch on that and say I thought it was just such a fitting way to close that out. And Tooch, and I didn't even get a chance to tell you, Tooch, because there was no post-credit scene. But if I were to tell you to wait around for it, I can just tell you about it. But I will say it was a very emotional to kind of hear that, and it sounds like it was for you too, Ethan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great reminder that this all started from what that one person built, and it all grew from what Tony Stark built in a cave with a box of scraps. And it was a nice way to pay tribute to how it all began.
Yeah, it sure was. And man, guys, we talked about this monster of a movie. It's been about an hour and 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure sharing the airwaves with you all tonight. Ethan, it's always a blast having you on, and I can guarantee you, Tooch and I will have you back in July when we talk about Spider-Man Far From Home. We hope you'll come back and talk to us then. We'd definitely love to have you on. And tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter and what kind of stuff you have to offer for everyone to follow you.
Absolutely, yes, and thank you for having me. I've had a blast. I could talk about this movie all of these movies for another hour or two, but I'm definitely going to be back for Far From Home. I'm excited about that, looking forward to it, and you can follow my cartooning and my artwork on Facebook. I have an art page called Ethan Drew That, just as it sounds, Ethan Drew That, and then on Twitter, I am at Ethan Colchamiro, which is probably hard to spell, but if you follow the box office barroom, you'll see me tagged in there plenty. So love to see everybody on Twitter and check out my art. I will have some Endgame inspired art on Ethan Drew That later this week.
Nice.
Awesome, man. Yeah, and everyone who's listening, you'll definitely be able to follow Ethan. He'll be tagged in all the posts on Bears Barroom and Box Office Barflies, so you'll have no trouble finding him there. Make sure you give him a follow. Absolutely awesome stuff there. Tooch, I got to thank you, brother. It's always great having you, my friend. Love doing this with you.
Oh, man, thanks again, Joe, for hosting and producing. It's been great. Great movie. Looking forward to Spider-Man Far From Home. Spider-Man in England, man. How great is that going to be? That's going to be kick-ass. And thanks to all the Barflies, all the Barroom listeners. Follow me at Santucci_John. Don't forget to follow Box Office Barflies at the BOB Podcast. And
that's right.
Follow our Joe and I latest show, I Have a Stream, at I Have a Stream Pod on Twitter. And we're live every Monday for I Have a Stream talking Game of Thrones.
That's right. And before we close things out, I got to give a huge shout out to Mr. Aldo Gandia, the godfather of Bears Barroom. Thank you for letting us do the show. We love doing it. And for everyone still listening to the live stream, we love you. Thanks for being in the chat room. And as always, we'll see you guys at the movies.
All right.
Thanos did exactly what he said he was going to do.